What's up YouTube, Capital G here, doing a boom or bust on Phantom Knights. I think it's time to start covering the decks and archetypes from Wing Raiders. Wing Raiders has been out long enough to where I believe that these archetypes have pretty much made their mark on the meta, and we can at least predict with some accuracy, how these decks are going to fare going forward. Now, I'm just going to be very blunt. I think that Phantom Knights are an absolute boom, and I think we can look at a deck that's very similar to it, and we can look at that deck's competitive history and how successful it's been. The deck that I'm talking about is Burning Abyss, and if you look at Burning Abyss and Phantom Knights on paper, they are extremely similar. So far, or so much so, I even feel comfortable calling like Phantom Knights Burning Abyss 2.0, because just like Burning Abyss, they are all dark. Just like Burning Abyss, they are Exceed based. Just like Burning Abyss, you pretty much play off the monsters all activating in the graveyard, and just like Burning Abyss, the deck has an extremely good grind game. A lot of this grind game comes from the fact that the monsters and the traps pretty much, they pretty much all work in unison. This is not a deck where you're really going to be running a really heavy spell count, just because the spells are nice, but when it comes to like milling them, you don't get a lot of advantage from milling spells in this deck. I mean, maybe you could incorporate things like Galaxy Cyclone, but for the most part, the monsters and the traps work in unison. See, if you don't know anything about this deck, when the monsters hit the graveyard, when the monsters are in the graveyard, they can banish themselves to get additional effects. Cards like Silent Boots and Ancient Cloak, they can actually get you other Phantom Knight cards straight to your hand. Mainly, a lot of times you'll be able to get the traps, because when the traps are used and then the traps go to the graveyard, this can either be because your opponent destroys them or you destroy them yourself. You can actually then banish those same traps to summon the Phantom Knight monsters right back. So you get so much utility from these cards. You basically get dual utility from every single Phantom Knights. Now that does come with a little bit of a drawback. If your Phantom Knights are summoned this way, when they leave the field and they go back to the graveyard, they're actually banished instead. But we know that you can pretty much cheat around that by going into the Exceed, because like Exceed materials are not technically on the field. Now this is a deck just like Burning Abyss, where its bread and butter is the rank 3 Exceed pool, which is why of course you're going to maximize all of your level 3 Phantom Knights. And just for clarification, yes, Phantom Knights do have some level 4s. I know about them, but they're garbage. Like, we're not even going to talk about them for all intents and purposes, because they're just not that good. Like, this deck works much better as a rank 3 version, whether you're running this version. This is a regional top 8 deck, by the way, from like 10 days ago, or you're running the Burning Abyss version. This is the version that top 8'd YCS Las Vegas. Whether you're running the Burning Abyss version or just kind of like the stand-up Phantom Knights version with some speedroids in it, rank 3 is what you're all about. Now the Burning Abyss version makes most of its advantage by going into Dante's or just pretty much milling as many cards as you can, and then using your graveyard as essentially a toolbox, because we've already explained when these hit the graveyard, they can search for the traps, and when the traps are in the graveyard, they can special summon the monsters back for free. And all of these cards, all of these rank 3s, they're all generic. Like, you can use Burning Abyss plus like Phantom Knights to make Dante. You can use Burning Abyss plus like Phantom Knights to make Breaksword. So it's really convenient that all of their boss monsters, including like Dark Rebellion, Exceed, and up, they're all generic. So that's really nice. It's really convenient. Let's go back to this version. Now the speedroids actually give this deck more utility, because you may look at the Burning Abyss version and you may look at this one and say, this deck lacks some explosive plays, but not really. This card right here, Terratop, it is essentially, if you don't have any monsters on the field, it acts almost identical to a card like Tour Guide, because you can special summon Terratops, and then Terratops can get you another Speedroid monster for free. And then obviously you can normal summon that, and you can go into your Dante to start milling, or you can go into your Breaksword to start popping things. Breaksword is so amazing in this deck. This is your new age version of Scrapdragon. When Scrapdragon came out in Duelist Revolution, it was an amazing card, because not only did it pop things on the field, anything, but it allowed you to make use of cards like Phoenix Chain, cards that you had already used, to kind of get dual utility out of those cards. This card does the same exact thing, but even better. See, when this guy is destroyed, he actually summons 2 Phantom Knights with different names back from the graveyard, and then he turns those into level 4s, and then you can exceed with those and do even more damage. So a lot of times with Breaksword, you can pop the Breaksword itself. You can blow up like a problem monster that your opponent might have on the field. Like if they have, I don't know, an Erebus or something like that, you can pop the Erebus, and then you can bust out something like Dark Rebellion Exceed Dragon, and you can use Dark Rebellion Exceed Dragon's effect and, just kind of run over something like that. So the deck does have a lot of removal, and even though the deck doesn't have natural spell and trap destruction, much like Burning Abyss, I guess you could say outside of Breaksword, The good thing about a card like Twin Twisters in here is, since we've already acknowledged that essentially all the traps and all the monsters float, you can discard any of these and still never really go neg, because your graveyard is essentially your second deck. It's like your second main deck. Now, a card like Leviair the Sea Dragon has been like, it's kind of seeing a resurgence in play because of this deck, because it's rank 3 and because your Phantom Knight monsters banish themselves to search other cards, so why not just summon them back? Now, the great thing about this over a deck like Burning Abyss is, since the Phantom Knights don't really have any restrictions for what they can exceed into, you can use them with Burning Abyss monsters, you can use them with Speedroids, and you never have to worry about having any drawbacks. You never have to worry about them having any drawbacks. In fact, one good thing about this deck is you actually can synchro. I've seen a lot of people recently that have sided in things like Flying Sea. It's really not that effective against this deck, even though this deck is majority Exceed based. Never forget that there are cards like Trishula, and if you give your opponent a Flying Sea, this deck will simply use one of its tuners, something like Tri-Eyed Dice or Ghost Ogre Snow Rabbit, which is, a card that can be summoned straight from the deck because of teleport and whatnot, and it can easily just Trishula you, so that's not even a worthy defense against this deck. So I look at this deck and I'm like, the grind game is exceptional because it's almost like you never really run out of resources, because you summon these guys, you can blow up things with Break Sword, you summon them back immediately, none of your stuff ever gets banished until you really want to. Even when your stuff gets banished, you can use things like Leviair the Sea Dragon to get them back. You can incorporate Floodgate cards easily in this deck, things like Mask of Restrict or Anti-Spell Fragrance to shut down Monarchs and Draco Pals. And then on top of that, considering you can make rank 4s in this deck relatively easy through Break Sword, you can actually add protection onto those Floodgates. The same way that Pepe, or the same way that Draco Pals will make things like Iron Wall against, Cosmos, and then they'll use their maybe Armageddon Knight plus like a Zephyros to make Master Key Beetle. This deck can do the same exact thing, and it can lock out a deck like Pepe from being able to play or something like that. You can also easily incorporate things like Gozen Match, since a lot of the deck is dark, especially the Burning Abyss version. It's almost entirely dark, although that would stop you from being able to special summon your Burning Abyss monsters. But, maybe you're playing against a deck where the attributes are all over the place. Like maybe you're playing against Super Quantums, and if they can only control one attribute, then you're definitely going to win. I don't know. I feel like this deck, it's very reminiscent of Burning Abyss, but kind of without many of those restrictions. Without those restrictions of blowing your monster up or having to lose to a card like Flying Sea, or a monster getting put face down. I think that their plays with the rank 4 are really convenient, especially when you combine those with Ragged Gloves. Ragged Gloves gives any dark Exceed that you make with it 1,000 attack, and that's really convenient because it actually turns cards like Evil Swarm Nightmare into offensive threats. I know that you guys, like 95% of the time that Nightmare summoned, it's always in defense mode because it can't really do much. Like 950 attack is like, that's no damage. Anything can run that over. But what if you could turn that monster into a 1950 attacker? Now he's actually a legitimate offensive threat. And what's cool about Ragged Gloves is, even if you detach the Ragged Gloves to use something like a Key Beetle effect or Dark Rebellion Exceed Dragon's effect, you still keep that 1,000 to gain attack. So it makes all of your rank 4s into instant threats. This deck also can get over like, Cosmo, like Dart Destroyer and the non-targetable guys by going into things like Utopic Future. And I don't know, I just feel like with things like Soul Drain and a lot of the counters like Macro Cosmos being limited, I feel like there aren't a ton of options. This version isn't completely dark based, so even something like Shadow Imprisoning Mirror wouldn't completely shut this deck down, because your 9 Phantom Knights are obviously dark, but then in a standard Phantom Knights deck, a lot of your other monsters like Terratop and Dice and Mathematician, Ghost Ogre, they're not going to be light monsters, or they're not going to be dark monsters. So you don't get completely shut down by even something like Shadow Imprisoning Mirror. And I feel like this deck is fast, it's consistent, there are a lot of monsters that can be searched from the deck, and I think it's definitely here to stay. And anytime you just have a searchable Fiendish Chain that you can get right from the deck, and then when it's destroyed, you can just banish it to summon another monster, like that's just an easy power play that's going to make most decks kind of just, they're just going to facepalm, because it's such a powerful play against a deck like Monarchs. Like, you wanted to summon Aedia, well, okay, just negate. You pretty much can't do anything for the rest of the turn. oh, you wanted to summon Joker, Negate, you know, or your Performa Pal, Pendulum Sorcerer. So yeah, I like this deck a lot, and it has an exceptional grind game. It has very good removal because Breaksword is very easily summonable, and you never go neg with Twin Twisters, and there are limited resources for a pure version as far as to stop them, because things like Flying Sea and Shadow Imprisoning Mirror are not super effective against the deck. I think that the deck is going to float right below, I think it's going to float right below Monarchs and Draco Pals for now. But if the ban list ends up hitting those decks, look out, because the only thing in a pure version that I would foresee possibly getting nicked is maybe something like Teleport and Dante, but this deck could easily operate with just one Dante. You know, the Burning Abyss version will probably die off if Dante ends up getting limited, but that's, you know, neither here nor there because we don't know what's going to happen. So let me know what you guys think. Again, I'm giving this deck a definite boom. Too much grind game, guys. The grind game for this deck is extremely powerful, and I don't know, a lot of battle phase tricks with the Phantom Knights traps. You know, I didn't even talk about these this much, but being able to get 800 attack during the damage step, searchable card, being able to get 500 attack, making sure your monster is immune from destruction for that turn, it's pretty big. So thank you guys for watching as always.